Here's what most people think about systematization. They think it's about automating everything, getting rid of the human touch, making processes so tight that no one person matters anymore. They imagine a world where their job becomes a series of clicks and workflows, where their time is spent building systems that run themselves. And they're wrong. Oh God, are they wrong? You can't just automate your way out of work. The real failure isn't in not automating enough, it's in trying to automate too much. People treat everything like it's the same. They try to turn judgment into checklists and relationships into flows. They want one-size-fits-all solutions that apply to all their tasks, even when they don't belong together. This is why most systematization projects collapse, because they ignore a fundamental truth. Not all work is systematizable the same way. This is Work Yourself Out of a Job, the show about building systems so good that you can walk away from them without anyone noticing. I'm Mikey, and today we're talking about the three buckets. The one thing everyone gets wrong when they try to systematize their work. Here's how it works. Every task you have, whether it's something you do for a living or something you want to get rid of, falls into one of three buckets: rules, judgment, and relationships. This isn't some fancy framework. It's the way your brain actually works when you think about what can be automated and what has to stay human. Rules are deterministic. If I give you the same input every time, you know exactly what output to expect. That's a rule. These become SOPs and automation with almost no risk. They're the easiest part of systematization because they don't change. Judgment is contextual. It depends on trade-offs, experience, and how things look in the moment. You might have to decide between two good options based on gut feel or past experience. This gets encoded as checklists, heuristics, and decision criteria instead of rigid scripts. The goal here isn't to eliminate judgment. That's impossible. It's to make sure that judgment is consistent and repeatable when it needs to be. Relationships are human. They're trust, negotiation, context that lives between people. These get documented and warm transferred, never automated away. Because if you try to code up a relationship, you lose the trust the moment someone else picks up the phone. This sorting is not optional. It's the single most important step in systematization. People try to automate judgment and end up with brittle rules that break on edge cases. They try to write SOPs for relationships and lose the trust that makes everything work. You have to ask yourself, what kind of task is this? What's the nature of this problem, and what tools do I need to solve it? So how do you actually do this? Step 1 is mapping your tasks. You have to know exactly what you're dealing with. Take everything you identified in the disappear test. That's where you start. Then ask, is the outcome predictable? Do the same inputs always produce the same result? If yes, it's a rule. If not, move on. Next, does this task require trade-offs, experience, or intuition? If so, it's judgment. It might need to be broken down into parts if there are multiple judgments happening at once. And finally, does this involve trust, negotiation, or something that only works in person? If yes, it's relationships. Once you've sorted them all, then comes the hard part, the right tools for each bucket. Rules get SOPs and automation. This is where your system can actually save time, but only if you do it properly. Don't write a script that assumes everything stays the same. Build in flexibility. Judgment becomes checklists, heuristics, and decision criteria. These are like mental shortcuts that help people make the same kinds of calls without getting stuck or second-guessing themselves. They're not rigid scripts, but they do guide decisions so that even someone new can follow the same logic. Relationships are documented and warm transferred. You write down what happened, but you don't try to put it into a machine. You have to be able to hand off with context, not just facts. The person who takes over needs to understand why things were done the way they were, not just how they were done. This is where most people make their biggest mistake. They try to treat judgment like a rule, or relationships like rules. They create systems that seem smart on paper, but break down when someone tries to use them in practice. So here's what happens when you don't sort properly. You automate something that needs judgment and you get rigidity. You make a checklist that doesn't account for edge cases and you end up with more work. You try to code up trust and you lose the very thing that made your system valuable. The real leverage is not in trying to automate everything, it's in finding the vital few things that actually matter. The handful of tasks across all three buckets that your company would pay to keep. That's what I call the ransom list. This list is different for everyone, and it's not about quantity, it's about quality. It's not just anything that takes a lot of time, it's what matters most to results, to reputation, to people who depend on you. I've seen teams try to systematize everything only to find out they've spent months building a process for something that doesn't matter. They've created complexity where simplicity was needed. So don't just sort and document. Find the vital few first. That's where your energy needs to go, not trying to make everything perfect, but making sure the few things that matter are done right. The key is understanding that you're not trying to build a single system. You're building three different kinds of systems. Each bucket has its own approach, its own risks, and its own rewards. You get to choose how each one works based on what it actually does. You can't solve your whole systematization problem with just one tool. You need to be able to use rules in the right way, judgment when it's needed, and relationships where they're essential. And that requires deep understanding of what each bucket means, not just a label you slap on something. That's how you avoid falling into the most common trap, trying to fit everything into one neat solution. Some things are rules, some are judgments, some are relationships, and those three buckets don't mix. They're not interchangeable. You need different tools for each. Here's what people get wrong when they try to systematize without bucketing. First, the classic mistake is thinking everything is a rule. So they write step-by-step scripts and expect them to work perfectly every time. But rules don't account for exceptions. They break on edge cases. A rigid process that doesn't adapt can't handle real-world problems. Then there's the opposite extreme, trying to build SOPs for judgment tasks. You can't turn a decision into a checklist without losing all the nuance that makes it work in practice. This creates brittle systems that fail when something unexpected happens. The third mistake is treating relationships like rules or judgments. You try to codify trust, negotiate through templates, and transfer context cold. But that's not how relationships work. Trust isn't a variable you can plug into a system. It's something that grows over time between people. And all three of these mistakes happen when people rush to build systems without taking the time to understand what they're building. They think systematization means automation. But real systematization is about choosing the right approach for each part of your work, not applying one tool everywhere. You can automate tasks that are rules, but only if you actually understand that they're rules. You can encode judgment as checklists, but only if you know how to do it without turning it into a script. And you can document relationships, but only if you're careful about preserving the human part of them. The real danger is assuming that because one thing is easy to automate, everything must be the same way. That's not how systems work. If you try to treat judgment like a rule or relationships like rules, you'll end up with something that doesn't actually solve your problem. So here's the takeaway in one sentence. Sort your tasks into rules, judgment, and relationships before you build anything. Then apply the right tools to each bucket, never the same approach to everything. Your leverage is not in automating everything. It's in finding the three things that actually matter. That's work yourself out of a job. If this one earned its time, the full system is inside the course at learn.mikey.ai. I'm Mikey. Go find what you can let go.